podcast spreading positivity around the world by sharing inspiring life experiences. Today's guest is a seasoned transformational coach, founder of the Dad Nation, and host of the globally ranked Dad Nation podcast. He helps high performing leaders reclaim their home, health, and happiness without sacrificing their career success. There is more to him, but we will leave that for later. As usual, we aim to educate, motivate, and inspire you. So grab your warm drinks and let's get it rolling. Hello, Mitchell, and welcome to Podcast with Sheila.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here today. Looking forward to having this conversation with you.
Great. I'm excited. This seems to be like a new topic we are having on Podcast with Sheila. We've never talked about men's mental health, and that seems to be a topic that is coming up lately
Mm.
around the globe. So I'm excited for us to have a conversation around it and see how it goes. So take us back to the beginning. What was life like growing up in a challenging environment, and how did it shape who you are today?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, I mean, that's a great question. I think a great place to start, Sheila. So thank you for asking. And I just want to say before I jump in, thanks for having me on today. Looking forward to having this conversation.
Right.
Um, I think a lot of people, ask where that turning point, was. For me, everyone has that sort of catalytic moment where they turn their life around. And so for me, it was really 2 points. There was one, which was a fight, and another one, which was a funeral. And so really the first thing that happened was I had gotten in a huge fight with my wife. We had been married for about 3 years. And, it was a hard 3 years. And we had always said we would never use the word divorce. And today, was the day that we did it. And we said, you know what, if we can't figure this out, then this is over. For me at that point, I'm a fixer, and this fight, this day, I knew if something didn't change, this marriage was going to be over. And now to take you back, a little bit more, to give you some context, I was recently fired from a senior leadership position I was in. And as men, especially, our careers are everything. We wrap our identities around them, all those things. It, I mean, it was my calling, and so I spiraled into depression. Um, I was about 60 pounds overweight. We were about 100 grand in debt, and I was medicating with drugs and alcohol, trying to just cope with kind of where I was at in life. And on top of that, now being dangerously close to divorce. And Sheila, it really didn't make sense to me because I would come home and I'd ask myself that question of why is it that business makes so much sense to me? Why is it that I can lead, boards and leadership teams all day, but when I come home, I don't know how to talk to my own wife. I feel so powerful at work, but I feel powerless when I come home. And maybe your listeners have been there, but that was the challenge I was in, and that was the current snapshot. And then to take it back even more to the upbringing, which you had asked about, I come from a dysfunctional upbringing, and I had non-existent relationship with my father. Alcoholism, abuse, crime were just a part of my family growing up, and I was sort of caught in the middle of it, and I didn't really deal with that, and so when I got married, the wounds from my past kind of began to bleed out into my marriage. And when I would yell, I could hear my dad's voice in mine, and I knew that I wanted to end this generational cycle because my dad was an alcoholic and his dad was an alcoholic, but I didn't know how, you know. And so that was the position I was in. And the second point, the turning point was a funeral. And that was about a week after this huge rock bottom moment. And really all it was I was attending the funeral. I was asked to sing for this funeral. This very wealthy philanthropic man. There's a couple thousand people there. And as I was putting on my guitar and getting ready to sing the last song, the minister asked a question to the congregation, and he said, "Are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die today, would you be proud of the legacy that you left?" And Sheila, like, uh, by the time I was trying to sing the last, that last song, I could barely choke out the lyrics because all I could think was, if this were my funeral, no one would be saying, "I want to have the marriage that he had," or "I want the body that he had or the bank account he had. So I took ownership. That day I decided that I would rewrite these new chapters, because my life up to that point, the first chapter was my childhood, and that was sad. The next chapter was my marriage, and that was a struggle. And so I decided I have to take ownership, and this ends with me. And to be honest with you, Sheila, within 18 months after that day, we paid off the 100 grand in debt, completely restored our marriage. I lost the 60 pounds, reclaimed my health, was clean of substances and alcohol, and was focused and confident. And that was about 8 years ago. And I surrounded myself with a community of men who, my ceiling was their floor. They were living where I wanted to go. And that was a huge part of my transformation journey. These men held me accountable. They held me to the standard that I said I wanted for me and my family. And so again, one of my mentors challenged me along the way about a couple of years ago, actually. And this was a 6, 7 years into my development journey. He said, if you want to truly uh, build a legacy and leave a lasting impact, start a podcast and tell the world about your story. Because I, up to this point, started helping people for free, just friends of mine, helping them, repair their marriages and get out of debt and things like that. So I started the Dad Nation podcast, and within about 6 or 7 months, I had listeners around North America, and then they started asking, "Hey, would you coach me? Would you teach me?" And then 6 months into the launch of the podcast, I launched my coaching practice, and that's what I do today. Ed Milet says, "You are the most qualified to help the person you used to be," and that's what I do. I help high performing men reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness. Because, in my opinion, those are the things that matter the most, right? But we often, especially as men, don't necessarily focus on those. It's really easy to focus on the career and lose sight of the other things. So that's my story, and that's how I got here.
Wow, that's a beautiful story you shared right there. And your life has become an open book for people to see and know that you've been there and you were able to navigate it out properly. So I believe you didn't have the divorce after all. And I'll
No,
be
yeah,
happy
we're
for
still
you.
together.
Great. I'll be happy for you to share with us exactly what happened. Because another thing that has become very trendy is people get married and then the next moment they are divorcing. And I know there are a lot of marital challenges going on, and people will definitely be looking for answers or ways to salvage their marriages, their relationship, and keep it together. And I always say that our children look up to us. So um, we are the first teachers they see as they grow up. They will actually imitate whatever they see we do. And
Hmm.
if you don't have a child who would ask questions that will require you explaining it to them properly, then they are making minds of whatever they see and going along with it and building their lives and thinking that is what is supposed to be when it's not that way. Because I believe, um, like you had said, growing up, you had come from a dysfunctional home. So you probably grew up with what you saw.
Hmm.
Obviously, didn't know any better. So went into marriage with what you saw. And like I always say that as adults, our children are looking up to us. So it's up to us to be doing the right things so that we impact on them positively. And I'm excited you were able to share your story the way you did it today. And I'm looking forward to more things coming up, and especially hearing how you were able to salvage your marriage from divorce. Because that's another thing I'll be happy for us to shed more light on, as a lot of people are struggling in that area as we go forward. But you've openly shared how you were you were 160 pounds overweight, in serious debt, and struggling in your marriage. What was the exact turning point that sparked your transformation? I believe you've spoken a little bit about this, but can we talk more about how this turning point came about? Like you had said, from church and also, but let's shed more light on it and exactly how were you able to shed the 60-pound weight overweight, and how were you able to deal with your serious debt?
Hmm. Yeah, we could talk about strategies all day, but at the end of the day, the thing that was the real kicker for me that allowed me to really get focused was learning that I had to take complete ownership over where I was at, you know. And there's a saying, that our lives are where they are today because of the decisions that we've made 3 to 5 years ago. And when I think about the decisions I was making 3 to 5 years ago, it makes total sense as to why I'm here today. Now, if you're, and I'll speak to your listeners, like if you like where you are right now in life, then that's a great thing. Keep doing what you're doing. But if there are things that you want to change, then we cannot keep doing the same things and expecting different results. That's Einstein's old definition of insanity, right? And so for me, I was like, I had to take complete ownership of where I was at, when I asked myself, how do I really like my life? How's it going for me? Because it was my level of decision making and my level of thinking that got me to where I was. And so I started with the end in mind. Okay. So this is one of the first places we go, with my clients, for example. Stephen Covey, in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, chapter 2 is called Begin with the End in Mind. Napoleon Hill, which is one of the greatest thought leaders of our time, always talked about beginning with the end in mind. My funeral moment, when that minister asked the question, "Are you living a life worthy of imitation?" That was my moment of beginning with the end in mind, because I was thinking for the first time in my life, what will I be known for? If I were to die today, what would I be known for? What would my wife say about the husband I was? And so what I do with my clients is we actually start by using or doing a eulogy exercise, where I actually get them to write out the eulogy from the perspective of their wife. If you were to die today and your wife was standing over your casket, what would she say about the man you were, the husband you were, the father you were? Okay. Now we're going to write a 2.0 version of that eulogy. If you were to be every bit the man that you feel called to be, the husband, the father, whatever, what would they say in that eulogy? Right. And we get really, really, really honest and we begin with the end, because that you can't ignore that. Right. And then so we say, okay, here's where you are and here's where you want to be. Here's what you're currently known for and here's what you want to be known for, right? As a loving father, as a you know, uh, a man who cherishes and honors his wife, as a whatever. And now, what does it look like to align our actions with the things that we say we want? Because again, with this idea of honesty, so many of the clients, the starting point is that question of like, what do you want? And Sheila, 90% of my clients don't even have an answer for that question, because they've spent so much time building the business and building the career and building someone else's dream that they don't necessarily understand what they truly do want. And when they do discover what that is through the eulogy or through the different tools we use, they begin to realize that how I'm acting, the decisions I'm making today is not actually in alignment with the person I want to be. Because I say I want to have a great marriage. I say I want to be a present father. I say I want to be in shape. But in my actions, I'm snapping at my kids. I'm not prioritizing my wife. I'm scrolling on my phone. I'm drinking too much. I'm not eating well. And so I've essentially helped men understand the disconnect between what you say you want and what your actions tell us, because those are two very different things. And so for me to answer your question was raw, complete honesty, about where I was at, because I had to be honest and say, my decisions got me 100 grand in debt. My level of thinking got me drinking and smoking drugs to cope, and it got me on the verge of divorce. The way that I live on my own, had me 60 pounds overweight. How's that working for me? It's not, right? And so if I want different results, I have to take ownership and think with the end in mind and say, What do I want to be known for?" And I'm going to be the only person. Like my wife is not going to be the person that's going to do that. She's not going to take the phone out of my hands when I'm scrolling. My son is not going to take the cheeseburger out of my mouth, or someone's not going to be monitoring my Amazon account, making sure I'm not overspending, all these different things. I have to take ownership. And so for me, that was the starting point. And the second big component to this was the community piece, right? I had said I had reached out to 5 men who were mentors of mine. My ceiling was their floor. They were living the dream that I wanted. I literally, Sheila, it was as simple as this. I looked around my life and I said, who has the best marriage that I know of? Who's in the best shape? Who has the most money? Who's in the best place emotionally? And I just reached out and said, hey, you seem like you have this figured out, this whole marriage thing. You seem like you're in a great place. Would you be willing to meet with me like once a month, just grab a grab a coffee or whatever and mentor me? And so that was so profound and so powerful because when I got tired and when I got discouraged and I wanted to quit, these men held me to that standard and said, no, 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 no. This is what you said you wanted, remember? If you want this life, this is the way to it. It was so powerful that I've actually created a framework around it. So I call it the Iron Five. And every single one of my clients have an Iron Five. There are 5 men who surround them and call them up, right? So those are two big things for me.
Wow. It was beautiful listening to you, and I'm putting myself in place, not as a man, but as a woman, and trying to think just like, because we also go through things as women. And
Of course.
if, as married couples, if there is a divorce coming up, it's going to affect the man and the woman. So I'm thinking in that line, especially when you had mentioned a mentor, that is another good thing for us to look at. Find a mentor, somebody's marriage that inspires you, and let them guide you through and remind you, especially when you want to quit, remind you why you are in here and why you need to keep it going. I think
Hmm.
a number of times I've come to the bit where I've said to myself so many times that I wanted to quit, and I never leave. Sometimes my children ask, why are you in there though? And I don't know, but I keep reminding myself what brought us together. And I think some of these things keep me in here and say, there's a reason why you are in here. And also, I look at some of the sacrifices he made for me at the beginning, and all of those keep me here and hoping that it gets better from here on. But then I'm happy that, because I know I hear a lot these days, and lately I've been hearing this a lot, that men have a lot of ego. So for you to meet as a community of men or in your own small space where people are allowed to be themselves and accept their faults, because men hardly do though. I don't think a lot of men would accept their faults that easily. So for you to meet in a space where they accept their fault and say, this is where I went wrong and this is what I can do to get better, I think is a beautiful thing. And that is where change begins, especially when we accept the places where we went wrong and know we were actually wrong here. And this is what we can do to get better. And then we can help some of these relationships and marriages that seem to be gradually hitting the rock, which isn't supposed to. Because for me, in all of that, I'm looking at the impact on the children. And people will say, leave, leave and live, because when you're able to leave the bad relationship or whatever, the toxic relationship or toxic environment or whatever it is, you'll be able to save your life well enough to take care of your children. But then it means that you're taking the children out of what they have known from birth as a mother and a father in the house, and now giving them something that is totally new, which is going to take a lot of time for them to process and even accept, if that is what they want, to be living with parents at different times and not in the same house. So some of these things have an impact on them. And basically, I think that when we are making some of these huge decisions as separation and as divorce, we should have the children at the back of our mind and see how best both of us can break our egos and meet in the middle and see how we can work it out and not make sure that we are, you know, but loving ourselves along the journey and making it work for everybody in a great environment, basically. But I'm happy that you've been able to create a business that is helping men in that line. It'll be beautiful to have something like that for women.
Hmm.
Just
Yeah,
like
yeah, and I think I don't disagree. I think there are a lot of men who it's a combination of maybe they don't necessarily see what the problem is, or maybe they're just not even aware that there's a problem. But there's some statistics, like for example, I share this often, but in the United States today, 7 out of every 10 divorces are initiated by women. And in situations where the wife is a high earner or she's educated, that number goes to 90% of marriages. Divorces are initiated by women. So what does that tell us? I mean, it tells us that we got some work to do as men, right? And I say that lovingly. But out of those divorces, 80% of the time, the major reason for the divorce is because the wife feels emotionally disconnected
Yeah.
from their husband. And this is where we fall short as men. We don't necessarily understand how to connect with our partners on an emotional level, so that's a big part. And to talk about, you were saying you believe that it's so important for the marriage to work because the impact it has on children. Let me share some statistics with you because I think it's profound, to hear. But we know that today 1 in 4 children will grow up in the US without a father in the home. Now, out of those numbers, 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. 90% of homeless and runaway children come from fatherless homes. 85% of kids with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. And then 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. And so, while some of the parts of society may say that men don't matter or the marriage doesn't matter, I would argue that it does, our spouses need us to show up powerfully, our children need us, and our world needs us. And so when we understand and hear some of those statistics, yeah, divorce is easy. It's easy to get out. And in some cases, yes, it is the best option. But I think it's so important for us to consider all the options and say, what does it look like for us to get the tools that we need to build into this marriage? Because you're right. I think it's such a powerful model for our children. And we know, some of those statistics, it's just incredible. So I say all that to say to encourage your listeners with that.
Wow. Many men appear successful on the outside but feel empty at home. Why do you think that disconnect happens, and how do you keep the bridge, or how do you bridge this gap?
Yeah, I think this is really common where men struggle at home because here's the thing, the masculine in our essence, we're driven by accomplishments, we're driven by excellence, we're driven by career, tactical things, fixing things, very, very different than the feminine, right? Feminine and a person in their essence is driven by emotions, by intuition, by, relationships. And so this is why men find it so easy to succeed at work because when you're successful at work or when you're doing well, it's very easy to know how to get that you know for example, you get a performance bonus. It's very easy to tell if you're doing well. Revenue is up in this quarter versus last, so you can implement a strategy. It's very tactical. You get an attaboy from your boss. So it really kind of feeds into really the masculine nature of us as men. Very easy to track. It's tangible, right? But when we come home, we've spent 8, 9, 10 hours a day strategizing and implementing and getting validated. But when we come home, it's it it's so much harder to quantify what it looks like to be successful at home, right? Like I joke all the time. I say your 5-year-old son when you come home is not going to walk up to you and being like, "Hey, Daddy, here are 10 strategic reasons why you are an effective father." Like it's just this is not the way kids work. And how do you quantify you making progress in your mental health or emotional health? It's the lines are so blurry, and men struggle with that, right? And so what happens is because we don't. A man's two greatest needs is to feel respected and to feel competent. Okay, if a man feels disrespected and feels incompetent, he will be he'll turn into an apathetic shell of a man. Okay, and so what happens is They come home, they can't define success because it's not as easy, and so it's so much easier to focus their time back at work. And so they spend more time at work, which means they don't invest in the relationships at home, which makes the woman not want to respect him and maybe talk to him as though he's incompetent because he's not really around much, which then makes him lean into work even more because he's gaining respect and gaining competence there. And so the cycle goes and goes and goes, right? And so this is why it's so tricky for men, right? And in the same sense, we know that some of a woman's needs are to feel loved and feel cherished, to feel like a priority. And you can see how this cycle would work against each other, right? And this is what happens. It's a slow fade. And then before you know it, I've literally had clients call me in the office and be like, I don't want to go home because I feel normal here. I have use here. I'm good at what I do here. But if I go home, I feel like a failure, you know? And so you really have to be careful with that. And in a marriage, that becomes the question. How can we make our husbands feel more competent and respect them? But how can we make our wives feel more loved and feel more cherished and feel more seen? You know what I mean? Does that make
Wow.
sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. I think that you're hitting the nail on the head. And there are a lot of good things you're saying here that I don't think is only going to benefit the men, it's going to benefit the women as well. Because, in effect, if we act right, then we are able to boost the confidence of our men and we help them perform better. So I'm glad we are sharing these things because some of us needed to hear this, hearing it from a man and telling us exactly how men want to be treated. I think a couple of weeks ago, I was having a chat with my auntie, and I have a son. And from my family, my mom's side is more of the girls than the boys. You hardly have, I can count the number of boys we've had in like 3 generations. It's three. Every generation has one boy. So it's
Wow.
strange. Yeah, it's strange for me to see how boys behave or how men behave. And sometimes I find it very, very awkward. So I was having a conversation with my auntie, and she said, um, it looks like I've been blown away by some of these attitudes. One coming from my husband and from my son is a bit strange to me because I don't see it too often. So when it pops out, I'm like that. So some of us don't really know how men think, behave, because me particularly, I went to all girls schools. So I've been
Mhm,
around girls more than boys. I hardly
mhm,
make friends. I hardly, I'm not the sociable type. So I'll hardly meet a guy, learn well more about them and know how to act around them. So if I'm with somebody and the person is behaving some type of way, I get the shock. And I really,
mhm,
really get the shock. So hearing it come from a man telling us how some of you think or how men think and how men behave and how some of the things we do as women affect you. I think it's a great thing we are sharing here. So anybody
mhm.
who finds themselves in my shoe would know how to act around men and kind of be softer a little bit instead of thinking, oh, but he should know it. He should know he's not supposed to do it like that. He should know he's not supposed, that kind of thing. But so it's a good thing
Mhm.
we're having this conversation today.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I've been having conversations on a lot of female podcasts with women of influence. And because they don't, what I do is help them understand the mind of their husband to
Yeah.
help them get through to their husbands. Another thing that a lot of women don't realize is that men would way rather hear "I respect you" than "I love you." And this is crazy. So, for example, and I've done this multiple times. You get into a room of 100 men, and you ask them, "Okay, who in this room, by show of hands, would rather hear the words "I respect you" than "I love you"?" 90% of the time, or sorry, 90% of the room will hold up their hand when they say they want to hear "I respect you" far before "I love you." Now, women are usually the opposite. They want to hear "I love you." They want to be loved. They want to be cherished. One of the most powerful things you can say to your husband is, "I believe in you." That I think you're a powerful husband and a powerful man. You're a great leader. I love how you support our family. I think all these words of encouragement, and encouragement means to inspire courage. And so they're very action based. And so and they also imply respect and competence, right? That will fill his bucket 10 times more than saying I love you for the most part, right? Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is. It's very, very interesting. For me, I'm learning a lot, and I believe our audience will be taking a lot as well away with them. Tell us about the creation of the Dad Nation. What inspired it, and what impact is it having in the lives of fathers today?
Yeah, I started it because I, like you, saw a need, right? Like I said, I'd seen the impacts of this transformation in my life and in my marriage and my health, my finances, and all that. And after helping so many people in my own personal life just for free, I thought there's got to be more people. And what I understood is there are millions of men who are struggling, you know. Um, and this is not just my theory. This is fact, right? We know that today in the U.S. there are over 7 million men who are of working age but are not in the workforce because they are being distracted by medications, by social media, by drugs, by alcohol. We know that today the average American male spends up to 2,000 hours per year drowning himself with a screen, right? Scrolling, whatever. That's like 85 days a year. I mean, it's incredible when you think about it. And so men are lonelier than ever. They're and we struggle in silence. And so there's a huge need for it. That's why I started it. But what is it doing? I mean, we we help men reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness. I work with a lot of high performers who've built their successful businesses, great careers, and like I said in the beginning, they business makes sense to them, but when they come home, they don't really understand why the same rules don't apply. And so maybe they've gained 50 pounds, they've had a bad health diagnosis, maybe their marriage is on the verge of divorce, or maybe they don't know their children, or they're battling with insecurity or self sabotage or limiting self beliefs, all the things related to key relationships, health, and then mindset. So, for example, one of my clients, he was a high performing man, ran a company of 80 men he had underneath him, multiple seven-figure company. He called me in tears one day, and he was actually had a few beers and he had drank already. And he had said to me, he said, Mitchell, I found out that my wife had some runaway money saved up and she put a down payment on the place and she's going to take the girls. And he's like, "I don't know what to do." He said, and I've been coming home from work, and when she gets home, I go to my room and I drink myself to sleep." He's like, "I can't figure this out." And he's in tears. And so we start working together. And within 4 months, he's completely sober. He had lost 50 pounds. He was pre-diabetic. He had high blood pressure, high cholesterol. His doctor gave him a completely clean bill of health. And his wife is back. They're dating now again. They're all living together and in love and a thriving relationship. And now, what's great is his professional life has accelerated because when he shows up to work, he's sober, he's focused, he's on fire because he's happy at home, right? And this is what so many people don't realize is they think that they're separate, you know, life, like a home life and work life. No, no, they're very, very integrated, right? Marriage is unique in the sense that if your marriage is going right, but everything else is going wrong, none of that stuff matters. But on the flip side, if your marriage is going wrong and everything else is going right, still none of that stuff matters because nothing's right at home. And it truly affects everything. And so, that story of Mark is just a man who completely transformed his life. And these are the kinds of men that we help through the community. And whether it is clients that I coach, or whether it's people who just simply listen to the Dad Nation podcast, Like, we have 33,000 monthly listeners who tune in from all over the world who want the same thing to level up in their home, their health, and their happiness. And so, if you're listening to this and you're a man, or if you're listening to this and you know a man, which is 100% of us, there's something to be gained from this, I think. So,
Wow, it's a beautiful thing you're doing out there, Mitchell, saving relationships and keeping dads in the home and marriages together is a beautiful thing you're doing out there. And um, I don't know, but I'm sure that all the men will be holding you in high esteem, as well as the women, because you're keeping our men in the homes for us, and you're keeping the dads at home for the children as well. And you're helping us build better relationships. And I always say that we go through our trials to become better people, just so that we'll be able to help others navigate their path. And I say, anytime you're going through something, don't think that is you're going through a lot, or it's a trial, or whatever it is, but be looking at the positives out of it and say, I'm going to come out better, be a better person, and help other people become better as well. And I think that is what you've become,
mm,
allowing yourself to go through the hardships, the trials, the tests, to become who you are today, and helping other men become better versions of themselves and better
mm.
husbands and fathers in their homes. So thank you very much. How did you balance improving your health, marriage, and finances whilst building a six-figure business all within 18 months?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, they were separate. Of course, I went on this deep dive transformation journey, uh, and then focused on that, with mentorship. Then I started focusing on helping other men once I really restored my life and relationships. And then about 6 or 7 years later, that's when I launched the podcast, right? But I mean, for me, how did I stay focused? I think, in back when I was undergoing that transformation, I stayed focused by staying accountable to people, and that's huge, right? Like we talked about community. The thing is with men is we like to be lone wolves, right? Um, and I think a lot of guys think there's nobility to that. It feels masculine, like I'm gonna figure this out on my own. I'm a self-made man. I'm a blah blah blah, and I'm gonna put my head down. I'm gonna go to work, and when I come up for air, you all will see. But the lone wolf dies alone. Strong wolves build packs. And what we must understand is, you know, it takes, that old saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to raise a father. We need to be surrounded by other men. Masculinity is not something that can be taught. Masculinity is something that needs to be caught by being around other men. And that can't be taught by women because it's just we just have such different polarity. We're wired completely different, as we've been talking about. And so I think that's a huge part is being involved in a community of men who can remind you of the man that you are becoming and what the things that you say you want. The challenging thing is that that's not necessarily intuitive. A lot of men, that's not the first place they go, which is why we're in the position we're in today. You compare that, or you pair that sort of inclination to be a lone wolf with a society that is really confused about what a masculine man looks like today. You know, the word talk. I mean, I can't even say the word masculinity without feeling like I'm going to be canceled. The toxic masculinity movement, and so it just makes for a powerful combination for men to feel not like uh, not comfortable reaching out. You know, and so that's the beauty of this, and so that's how I kind of stayed on track. And at the end of the day, when I started the podcast and the coaching business, Sheila, um, it was kind of also for selfish motives because I know that the best chance I have at being a great father and being a great husband is to surround myself with men who are doing the same thing. You know, we know that the best way to learn something is to teach it, and so I learn and I teach, and I learn and I teach. And in my opinion, when I go back to my funeral moment, when that minister asked, Are you living a life worthy of imitation? For me, that is using my story to end the generational curse in my family, but help other men end those generational cycles as well. And so when I draw my last breath at the end of my life, if I can say that my life has been dedicated to helping other men restore their marriages and show up powerfully as fathers, and that's a life worthy of imitation.
Wow, that's beautifully said. What one powerful habit or mindset shift that every high performing man should adapt if they want to reclaim their home life?
Emotional awareness, um, the ability to emotionally connect with their partner and their children, right? And I'd love to give your listeners a gift for just listening to this conversation. And it's really to do with this. It's called the connection code. And it's 50 questions that are tried, tested, and true that are designed to help you connect with your partner on an emotional level, right? So, if you have listeners, if you're listening to this and you're a woman, download it for your husband. If you're listening to this and you're a man, download it. They're free. And basically, what I say is, hey, take these questions. They're designed to spark the fun and bring the fire back in your marriage. And so you can, when you go out on a date night or you put the kids down and pour up a glass of wine, whatever, take 3 or 4 questions off this list and ask your partner. It's a powerful tool that will help draw your partner out, draw your wife out, and feel and make her feel connected with emotionally. Because going back to, everything we've been talking about, that's the big disconnect, right?
Yeah.
It's because men spend hours and hours a day trying to fix things at work, and they come home and they feel like they can't turn that switch off, and they kind of keep shoving solutions down their wives' throats. And it's like, it's not what they need. They want you to just listen. And to engage them in conversation, to simply just talk for the sake of talking, which for men makes no sense, right? But if you teach them that and they get these again, they understand a new way of thinking and retool. And these are the things that can help, right? And so it's just if they and I'd love for you to put it in the show notes or the episode notes, but just go to the website dadnationcode.com/code. You can download it for free there. But yeah, I would say that's the big that's the big piece because your kids need to be connected with emotionally as well. They're gonna like you said, they're gonna model what you do, right? And I say to men all the time, we know statistically speaking, if you have a son, your son will grow up to be the man, the husband you are today. If you have a daughter, she will grow up to crave the attention from a man just like you. So if and we know that this is true statistically. So if you want your daughter to bring home a great man one day, then you need to model that greatness so she can recognize it and when she sees it for herself and other men, right? And that's the solution. They won't always do what you say, they'll do what you do. And the best way to do that is be emotionally available, to be present, And that's a skill we have to learn, especially as men, because it's not natural like it is for women.
Wow. I know that you said 50 questions, and I trust you. I know that they're going to be powerful questions, but share with us just one question out of it as a teaser so that we know what we're looking forward to.
Mm. My wife's favorite, and this is one of mine as well. It's just simple. I mean, we cover everything from like fun stuff to dreams, to intimacy, love, all that stuff. But a simple question is like, explain to me your dream day, the perfect day from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. Don't leave out any details, right? And then it allows your wife to sort of dream, think, oh, okay, okay, I'm gonna sleep in. I'm gonna have someone's gonna make me breakfast. Someone's gonna take care of the kids, whatever. And then they walk you through the perfect day. Where they want to go for dinner, what they want to do after. All those different things. The great thing about this for men is it's strategic because then you can take that information and you can say, okay, I'm going to use all this information to plan our next date night, right? She's giving you the playbook, right?
take notes of those things. Or like, again, just like a fun one is like, if you could travel anywhere you wanted, but the only limitation is that you had to go there by car, where would you go? You can't go there by plane. Or it's just like there's some of those are really light, fun ones too, but there's lots about intimacy and all kinds of stuff there. So, and again, it's just to engage, just for the sake of talking, like you did when you dated, right? And so many of us forget what that felt like, but that's exactly what you did. You spent hours talking on the phone or in the car, and you talked about your dreams, and you talked about your desires, and you talked about what was possible.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line that stopped, right? And these questions essentially just bring you back to that point again. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And it's like a conversation starter, and that's good. And just like I was saying, for me, what has kept me going is the relationship we had before it became chaotic, like before children came in and life came in and all of that. That is what keeps me going. So if you have something to always reflect on or look back on as a reminder, it keeps you going. And that's a beautiful thing over
Mm-hmm.
there when we're able to pick up conversations from back then when we started, conversations
Mm-hmm.
that was the driving force for the relationship. I think it helps. And those questions, some of them I believe sound like questions that will help us relive the past, good times, to help us remind us why we went on this journey and why we have to keep going. So I think that's a beautiful thing. It's a really
Yeah.
beautiful thing over there. Yeah.
It's just a couple quick ones, for men, and you think about it. There's one question now that we're talking about. It's like, and this is about the connection point about the
Yeah.
love part, but what's one moment in our relationship that made you feel the most loved? What was
Yeah.
one thing that I did, you know,
Yeah.
and allow your partner to share, or um, another question, what's one thing that I do that makes you feel truly seen and heard, as your husband? So all like really great questions that will help your wife sort of unravel, if you will, in a great
Mhm.
way, and also gives you great tactical information because men, we need a strategy, right? So anyway, just some things.
Wow, that's good. Your podcast reaches over 33,000 listeners monthly. What's one episode or guest that really struck a chord with your audience and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'm gonna pull it up right now and take a look here because there are a couple that stand out, at the top of my head. And I love when people ask me that question because it's super practical. Um, there is one that has been really powerful for our listeners, and that is episode number 47. It's called Sex and Smartphones. And this is with Dr. Trish Lee. She's a neuroscientist,
Mm,
uh, a published author. She's absolutely brilliant. And she works with men exclusively, and she talks a lot about the effects of pornography, social media, and how it impacts us in our mind, in our relationships, how it success or affects every part of our lives. And it's not just like random babbling; it's neuroscientific data by a doctor and a published author, and it was just brilliant. And I think it's pretty eye opening for guys. Um, who aren't maybe aware of some of these challenges. So digital dangers and all that stuff. There's another one with Tanner Clark. Let me just pull it up here real quick because the parents love this one.
mm,
Um, and it's let's see right here. He talks a lot about how to protect your children from digital dangers. It's actually episode 14. Um, Basically, the dangers of apps and the different kinds of apps you need to watch out for,
yeah.
and as a parent, how you can protect your children from these apps and which ones there are predators on. And also we get into like how to introduce a smartphone to your child. At what age is appropriate? And then when you do, how do you sort of how do you know when it's safe to give them more access? And really tactical episodes. So that's with Tanner Clark, episode 14.
Wow, I like those topics really, really much, especially with I think smartphone is a is a good and a bad tool, depending on how we use it as individuals and how we even allow our children to use it, and how we allow it to influence our relationships with our partners and all. So there's a lot that smartphone is doing in our lives today that some of us are not taking notice of, or even if we have, we still haven't found a way to help let it work for our good.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's a beautiful one, and I'll be happy to listen to it. That one you've mentioned over there. Now let's talk about building disciplined bodies, focused minds, passionate marriages, and lasting legacies. Which of those do men struggle with most, and how do you help them overcome it?
Yeah, I think they're all kind of intertwined, but I think the one thing that stands out, I think the one that has the biggest impact on men is actually the physical health piece. Because if your health is not great, if you're not fueling your body, you don't have energy to be a better husband or to be a better father or to have a strong career because you're not giving yourself a proper amount of fuel. Or if you don't exercise and you don't follow through, what happens is, when you start breaking promises to yourself, you lose self-confidence. And so the problem is you become more and more insecure, because you say you're going to get up and do this exercise, you say you're going to get up and start this plan, or you're going to, I'm going to start my diet on Monday, and then you don't, right? As we sometimes do. But the problem is psychologically what happens then is your subconscious mind begins saying things like, why should anyone else trust your word if you can't even trust yourself that you're going to follow through with a commitment, right? So we think that because nobody knows about it, then it's not affecting us, but it is on a subconscious level. When we talk about our self-confidence, that's how our self-confidence is built or torn down. Like if I said to you, Sheila, I'm going to meet you at Starbucks every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. And I did it the first week, but the second week I showed up at 11, and the third week I didn't show up at all. Pretty quickly, you'd be like, I don't know that I have confidence in Mitchell anymore that he's going to show up. Well, the same thing happens with our relationship with ourselves. So, the great thing about making a commitment and committing to your physical health is you make promises and you exercise and you show up, and it's very tactical as men, right? We're actually going, we're lifting weights or we're running or we're doing whatever. And we're repairing our self-confidence, which then gives us more psychological and emotional energy to focus on the other parts of our life. But also, we have the physical energy because we're fueling our bodies. These are getting stronger, right? We're eradicating a bad health diagnosis. Like clients of mine regularly will get off of blood pressure medication and high cholesterol medication and things like that because they don't need it anymore because their body gets regulated, their hormones get regulated. So for me, that physical component impacts everything we do. Because if you're sick or you're tired or you're weak or you're struggling with like heart disease or diabetes, it's going to affect every part of your life, right? And so every single one of my clients get a completely custom nutrition plan and a completely custom training plan based on the food that they're already eating with their families. Because remember, this is all about sustainability. So they tell me what you're typically eating with your families. I'm not going to make you learn how to cook all this new food, but we're going to slightly modify that and actually teach you how to cook for your family. Teach you how to teach your children how to eat for fuel and to be strong, right? So that's what I would say is the most important because that the trickle down affects everything else. Right.
Wow. There's a lot you're doing with the men over there. You're teaching them how to cook for their families. That's one thing I'm sure the women will be happy to have their husband. But that's a good
Yeah.
one there. If a listener is feeling inspired right now, but unsure where to start, what's the first step you would recommend they take today towards reclaiming their life?
Yeah. I mean, I would say uh, s- take a leap of faith, step out. Don't continue to suffer in silence, right? it's going to feel so counterintuitive, especially as a man. It's not going to feel natural, and you're not going to be confident. But that's the thing. You're never going to feel confident doing something you've never done before. It's actually impossible, right? And so confidence will come after you take the step and understand that, it is your desire. It is sort of natural for you to want to do it on your own. But I would ask you in love, how is that working for you? You know, and if it's not working, then reach out, whether it's me through the Dad Nation or someone else, but get yourself around a community of people who are living where you want to go, who are at the level that you want to be at in your marriage, in your fitness, in your finances or whatever. And if not for you, for your children, for your partner, because again, like we said several times, you are the blueprint, right? And there is an emotional significance that we carry in the home, and they are watching. And so if a lot of guys don't have the strength to do it for themselves and say, okay, well, don't do it for you, then do it for your kids, right? Because the best shot you have of setting them up for success is you shooting for success yourself and them seeing you in the struggle, in the thick of it. Them seeing you persevering and pushing and being held accountable. So powerful lessons that you can't teach. They just got to see it, right? And that's how they're going to learn it. So that would be my advice. And if you are, if this conversation resonated with you and you want to connect with me, then please by all means reach out. I'll give you the links, Sheila. But I tell people all the time, I do three things, real simple, three C's, okay? Content, courses, and coaching. So the content is the Dad Nation podcast. Course is something called the High Performance Husband, which is essentially everything I teach my one-to-one clients in a digital program that's self-guided. And the coaching is obviously group coaching and one-to-one. So I do all those things, but you can just check it out on the website or just listen to the podcast. You'll hear lots more from me.
Wow. This has been a very interesting session. I totally enjoyed it. There's wealth of knowledge you've brought to us, as well as your experience, the way you shared your story. I think that you've shared it from a place of passion and is going to touch a lot of lives when people take the time to listen to the podcast from
Mm,
beginning to the end. Personally, I'm taking a lot of things away with me today on
mm,
this podcast. I think it's a lot is an eye opener. And basically that was the main reason why I set this podcast up for people to share their experiences. And
mm,
today's one is like it's mine. We made it for
mhm.
me because I'm taking away a lot of lessons, and I believe a lot of people will be taking their lessons away as well. So thank you very much for coming on podcast with Sheila today.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation, and I'll leave your listeners with this that just resonates with me is just that time is the only currency we spend without knowing the remaining balance. I don't know if I have 60 minutes left or 60 years left. It's such a precious asset. And so, in saying that, I just want to thank you, Sheila, and your listeners for giving me that time to share. And I truly hope that I've added value to you if you're listening in any way. And yeah, thanks for having me on the show today.
Wow, it was lovely. If you've been listening in, this is season 2, episode 136 of our podcast series where we bring seasoned guests with inspiring life experiences to share with us. Don't miss out on all those lovely experiences. Subscribe and be notified when a new episode is released. Whilst at it, please take a moment to drop us a rating. Our prayer for you this week is that you become an advocate and a lover of peace. Remember, change begins with you. Until we meet again, have a brilliant week. Bye.